Our first speaker is Zahid Pranjal from the University of Sussex. So heard some of Zahid's excellent work over the last couple of years, and today he's going to be talking to us about some initiatives he's undertaken, embedding inclusivity and decolonial practices in the bioscience curriculum. So Zahid, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Zahid. I am a senior lecturer in biomedical sciences and also the deputy head of school for education. It's a recent role that I've taken on, and the same in School of Life Sciences. So it's 30 minutes, so I'm going to try and go through some of the things we've done in the school in the last few years in terms of embedding decolonial practices, but really inclusive practices. I think that's the main thing. So hopefully we'll cover most of the stuff. So the overview of the talk is, first I will try and define decolonization. It's a very complex topic, and definition can also be quite complex as well, because you have decolonization in higher education, decolonization in other sectors. So I think we'll try and keep it to what it means in higher education, and especially to us in Sussex. I'll give you a brief introduction to our Race Equity Action Plan that we launched in 2021. We'll give some examples of some of the inclusivity and decolonial practices in our curricula, and at the end we'll talk about project-based learning as a sort of a case study that demonstrates some of these decolonial features and inclusivity as well. So trigger warning, there will be some comments here and there, and that might not be pleasant, but I wanted to share with you some of the things that we kind of face with and some of the things that exist in the literature. So this is just starting off with two comments from two students. And the first one is a male Black student, and then they're saying that as a student you are sat there and you're listening to a lecturer talk to you about race, who in many respects does not understand what it is like to be a person of color. And a female mixed heritage student saying, when you think about our curriculum, it is actually very white and in many respects quite exclusionary. As a student of color, when you are sat in that space, you feel it. You feel like none of this relates to me. And this is not uncommon, I think, in many universities. Even in Sussex, we are a very sort of liberal university, but we find similar experience in our classrooms, especially in science classrooms, which is unfortunate. And so, so that's why the push since 2019, 2020, to change that culture in the School of Life Sciences. So let's just look at decolonizing the curriculum. What does it actually mean? So the term is often misconstrued as a process of deleting or dismissing past teaching or practices or literature. So when we first spoke about decolonization and inclusive learning back in 2020, when I joined Sussex, I think 2019, so within a year, we had some colleagues that said, do you really think we should remove all the papers and the reading lists that they're published by white authors, for instance? Well, that's not the point. So there's some misunderstanding here and there. So the idea for us is to enrich curricula, setting existing knowledge and education in the context of colonialism and Western power structures, and bringing in previously marginalized voices and perspectives. And that could involve sort of a critical analysis of how colonial forms of knowledge, pedagogical strategies, and research methodologies that have shaped what we know today and what we recognize, and how we reward such knowledge accordingly. So I think these things are quite important to think about. And it's not about deleting knowledge or histories, like I said, that have been developed in the West or colonial nations, but rather it is to situate the histories and knowledges that do not originate from the West against the context of imperialism, colonialism and power, and to consider why these have been marginalized and recentered. And again, it's about a different vision of what knowledges could be had imperialist colonial frameworks not shaped them And again, it's not about just adding diversity, so through making your reading list more diverse, but it is an interrogation of our ways of knowing and to consider what has been validated by Commission and what has been hidden by Mission. So I think so. The idea is to provide a diverse curricula that kind of appreciates the knowledges from both sides and highlights what has been sort of hidden or not taught in many respects due to a number of things that I've already talked about. So how do you go on about it? In our school, because we found that the term decolonization didn't sit very well with many peoples because of lack of understanding in the beginning. So this is talking about 2019, 2020. Now it's a term that we use all the time. I think there's always we need to give time for cultural changes, for shift in understanding from one domain to another. So we started off with the word inclusivity, and that resonated quite fine with most of our colleagues actually. So what did we do? We looked at teaching and assessment modes, and we sort of assessed inclusivity in a way, and all of this, by the way, were done with students, so co-creation throughout all the themes that I will talk about today. We looked at accessibility in learning. We looked at sort of teaching our students and staff about anti-racism and cultural competence in higher education. We looked at EDI compliant curriculum as well. So this sits now under the EDI. We also, in the recent newly reformed curriculum, we actually produced an employability-focused syllabus and teaching and learning and various other practices so students can learn real-life problems. And to us, this is actually a decolonial element because often in the past we see that in science curriculum you're given lectures, you learn the content, and you go to your practical, but there's not much emphasis on teaching the real-life situation. What do you do after your job? The various different skills and information that they need to have. Teaching historical biases and present-day implications, and discuss their perspectives, various perspectives in that area. Removing inequalities in power relations and structure. So this is looking through some teaching methods that we embedded. Role models representation. We need to improve this more. I think I'm the only person so far. Maybe there's another new lecturer that we recruited recently, person of color. And all of these actually sit within the Race Equity Action Plan, which I don't have time today to go through all the various areas, but I will just highlight a couple of them. And also the inclusive curriculum that we created the last 2 years and launched in September 2023. So Race Equity Action Plan, REAP, was grounded in the recognition of structural racism as a pervasive force that disadvantages people of color while privileging white individuals. Now, how did we come to this? We came to this, there was based on a survey. So we did a survey back in 2019, 2020, where we surveyed students and staff, and we actually had really interesting comments across the school and from many students. And we actually also looked at the staff ethnic background of our staff, PhD students, and there's also been awarding gap. So we combined all of that data, and we actually felt that this needs to be addressed. So we acknowledge that the presence of racism in higher education and its detrimental impact on schools' culture. So then our commitment was to address and dismantle this institutional and structural racism, align our actions with the University of Sussex Inclusive Sussex strategy, foster a culture of zero tolerance for racist behavior, and reassess and form our processes to ensure equitable treatment for all. And now we actually have done all of these in the school, and it's all part of the Race Equity Action Plan. Through various actions, through various policy changes, and changes in the curriculum, the way we teach, what we teach, and through peer evaluation to make sure that we are maintaining those going forward. So there are 6 main components here. So staff training and awareness. I think education is very important for all of us in this regard. Student experience, everything we do to in the teaching and learning is to improve and enhance our students' experience. We went through curriculum reform as well, which I mentioned. We also looked at research and laboratory experience for our students. So that involves undergraduate, postgraduate, taught, so masters, and also PhD students. And recruitment as well, and retention practices. So we looked at data, for example, how many people of color were interviewed and how many were recruited in the end. I also looked at concerns and complaints procedures, and we actually have achieved pretty much all of them. We still have things we need to improve, but it's working, I think. So I'm going to talk about some of the practices within higher education, especially in our school, that we addressed and improved. So first and foremost, what we wanted to do as part of the new curriculum is at modular level. We wanted our lecturers, our faculty members to recognize the dominance of Eurocentric narratives in the history of their own subject area. And so when they did that, it was a quick search on Google, and they found actually there are things that they could change on their lecture slides. Some information they could present in a different way that would actually highlight the true history of science, let's say. And then, obviously, through acknowledging the contributions of non-Western sciences and cultures to scientific knowledge. So as part of that, we actually have designed now a specific module on skills and ethics that teach these and some of these elements, for example, clinical trials and unethical practices from the past. We also have looked at creating lectures and seminars and the content embedding historical contexts, and provide co-curricular reading lists on these issues. So students who are interested, they could actually go away and read a paper or a book, for example. But we wanted to make learning as inclusive as possible, where you're not here to just become a biomedical scientist. You're here to become a well-informed human being when you graduate, with a better understanding of the history, better understanding of the present and the future, and your working life and all of that. So I'll give you an example of sort of how we did one of that. And I know we talked about race equity action plans, so it really it really highlights and emphasizes the importance of having different races or ethnic achievements in science-wise. But also there's inclusive curricula, so it wasn't just races that we looked at. We also looked at gender balance as well. So let's look at DNA discovery, and this is something we really highlighted in our first year teaching. So DNA discovery is a very simple one. Everybody knows about it. Not all students, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds, they don't know all these things. So when we teach DNA discovery, we always talk about Watson Crick and don't really mention Rosalind Franklin. And this is, we know this is not good practice. Let's put it that way. And we also kind of show our students that why it's not okay to not highlight or emphasize the Rosalind's contribution to this to DNA discovery. And I'll give you a text from the book, The Double Helix. Some of you may have read it, maybe all of you have read it, but I wanted to highlight a few things and show you the importance of addressing this and really showing why it's wrong. So here's the text. Again, trigger warning. It might not read pleasant to some of you. So Morris hoped that Rosie would calm down. This is just a text from the book. She would not easily bend. By choice, she did not emphasize her feminine qualities. Though her features were strong, she was not unattractive. It might have been quite stunning had she taken even a mild interest in clothes. And I will let you read the rest. So this is how Rosalind was described by these two male scientists, and you can see the inequality, the level of inequality, the extent of inequality that existed. And we teach about DNA throughout these our biomedical science, biochemistry, genetics degree. And we really want our students to know that, you know, the achievement, this achievement, this huge achievement, wasn't that straightforward. Rosalind had to go through a lot of discrimination based on a number of things that's mentioned here. But obviously gender is also key here. All right, moving on. Now, then how can we teach that? I'll just give you an example. It's very simple. Just first year lecture, let's say, an introductory lecture when you talk about DNA. When you talk about DNA, we can show a DNA picture. And a lot of the times we used to see this image of Crick and Watson, you know, showing the DNA model. But we can change it to something like this and actually talk about it. Talk about the perspective, discuss the discovery itself, some of the histories that have been talked about in that book. And you can also cite that book for people to read, for students to read, sort of extra reading. So yeah, so I mean, you know, so the idea was that can we move on from the left to the right, where we show the true history of science. This is just one example. There are many examples like this which we have embedded in our curriculum. I'm more than happy to talk about it throughout later on if you need, if you would like, anybody interested in it. And you know, examples of scientists are often we put. You know, if you ask a child, draw a picture of a scientist, it will just be a white man in most cases, obviously, white man in a white lab coat. But actually, that's kind of was the truth in the past. I'm not saying we should not appreciate that and acknowledge that, but I think it's also important to highlight some of the scientists from ethnic backgrounds, and you know, so there are some examples here. And you know, this person here, Dr. Wang, he was he's made some pioneering sort of discoveries to do with COVID-19, and there's a hematologist and also ecologist. So there are other scientists that you can look at. There's LGBTQ plus scientists. There's also some scientists from different backgrounds, from different fields that we can highlight. But displaying images of these scientists, is that a decolonized approach? In my opinion, no. It's it's just showing diversity. Decolonizing the curriculum is more than just adding diversity. So it involves questioning of our knowledge, of our ways of knowing, and examining both what has been included and what has been excluded from education. So this is very important that if we talk about a scientist from the 60s or 70s or 80s or even the recent days, why let's talk about them, their discoveries, their contribution in the field that shapes our knowledge, our understanding. So yeah, so the same applies to diversifying reading list. So this is a paper we published back in 2021 on reading list, and we did discuss various things on you know, some of the decolonial practices, but we actually made sure that diversifying reading list is what was talked about in that paper, because we are changing the author list doesn't always the papers of with authors from different background. It doesn't solve the problem unless we actually use those papers and talk about those scientists and their discoveries in our teaching. Important to contextualize the diversity introduced in its historical perspective, as well as ongoing benefits to science and research. Okay, so that's the main bit. The other bit is appropriately recognize and demonstrate contributions of indigenous and non-Western scientists. So I can kind of mention that there already, but providing true context is very important. For example, you know, when I was a student when I went to my undergraduate degree, it was heavily clinical and medical based. But I remember having a lecture on non-Western, or two lectures on non-Western traditional medicine and their practices and its contributions to modern pharma. I mean, it was great. It was so eye-opening for an 18-year-old going to university, and you know, and we were told why we don't use those practices in the UK under NICE guideline or BMC or GMC, you know, BMA or GMC, and why but they are still effective for the native people of those countries, of those cultures. And it was really, really eye-opening. So I think giving that sort of another perspective to what we are used to is actually very important. It's just eye-opening to many. Ensure that the curriculum sort of is relevant to all students in cultural context, from different cultural contexts. So you have to be mindful of the language we use and how we sort of teach in our classroom. So NHS still has on one of the web pages, they use the R word still to describe various type of condition. If you have to use that condition, if you have to use that word, put a trigger warning so that we are at least appreciating that this word might not be pleasant to some people in the classroom. But also demonstrate effects of recent events such as COVID-19. So effects among ethnic minorities, ethnic communities in the UK and other countries is also very important because it will relate to them. If I was sitting in a classroom and talking about COVID-19 and this many people have died, these are the vaccines. Why don't we talk about how many people were affected by, how many people from different backgrounds were affected by this? The data is out there. The vaccine discoveries and development and how many participants were from different backgrounds. Why not highlighting those as well? So just to show disparity, just to show the truth, I think it's very important. And historical events as well. So clinical trials in Nigeria, clinical trials done by Pfizer actually in Nigeria was a big one. And there are numerous clinical trials where we found many unethical practices, even in the West when it came to people of color. And again, it's teaching the undergraduate students. They need to know one day they'll be running the show, right? There will be scientists, there will be educators, they will be in these fields working and educating others. So it's very important that they are given that knowledge at the same time. So how can we implement cultural relevance in biosciences? So here we'll talk about the actual practices that we do in our classroom. So we have a module called medical microbiology, and in there we teach tropical diseases. So we teach them different viruses and bacteria and the pathogenesis. But we also talk about sort of the access to healthcare and Eastern sort of perspective versus Western, and then how it is for them in those countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Asian countries, and the UK and the West. And it's really important that they do this together. So we actually have seminars. We try to make sure that the classrooms, so the groups are gender balanced and race balanced, and so they kind of work together on these issues and try to answer some questions and write case studies. We teach them about history of vaccine development. So obviously we know we always talk about Jenner, Edward Jenner, but we can go even further back and actually look into history of where the concept was utilized in the past, and just to address the same problem. So disease outbreak, for example. And we talked about COVID-19 disparity, vaccine hesitancy. These things are real. So you can discuss those in a seminar in groups, bringing different perspectives, race balance, ethnic balance. You have students from different backgrounds. They can contribute their own ideas and experiences. And biodiversity, ecology, we find in biodiversity ecology lectures, mountains in Canada or USA or UK. And so why not talk about the hotspot that we have in south of India, for example, or in Africa, which are also critical for a healthy ecosystem. So showing different perspectives of these regions and really engage with students through active learning is what it is inclusive learning, but at the same time, the content we are teaching is coming from that region. We actually presented this recently at a conference in Saichi and also in another place recently. So imagine teaching about a disease, Alzheimer's disease. So traditionally or usually we actually teach underlying mechanisms. Coming from a biomedical background, what's really exciting for our students is to know how this disease is caused. But why not expand it a bit more? So give them a global perspective talk to them about how that sort of Alzheimer's disease affects Black people differently, and the treatments as well, that they're not really suited to suit our Black communities. And we know that for sure because there is a lot of studies now, and one of the studies were done in Sussex actually. Talk about access to healthcare in UK versus Nigeria, for example. Again, there are papers on this, and talk about the indigenous religious beliefs that shape these sort of understandings in those local areas. I was in Nigeria last year, and actually I saw it firsthand that the Alzheimer's disease to many people in Nigeria, not all places of Nigeria, some parts of Nigeria, where I was in the north, they see it almost like a mental illness, but it cannot be treated. There's a medical basis for it almost. And there are some other beliefs there too. Very interesting. But I think these knowledges now they're coming up, they need to be taught to our students. And then obviously the scientist contribution in the field of neuroscience in Africa. So scientist Mahmoud has worked a lot on this, and there are a lot of publications on this now as well. So again, the concept of personalized medicine is coming in. So it's all relevant, but all you're doing is you're increasing the bit more sort of information on these areas I just talked about. So I'm going to quickly go through it now. So employability focused curricula, very important. Mentioned briefly before that we want to teach our students diverse knowledge and skills that are beyond traditional Western-centric frameworks, because we have a lot of students who are now thinking about going abroad, Middle East, Thailand, China, the countries. We need to do something about it. So our students are learned when they leave Sussex. So we prepare them for global workforce by valuing diverse perspectives and competencies. And again, they need to, in our opinion, they need to know how things work outside the UK. Focus on developing a wide range of skills. So the teaching that we set up, practices that we set up in our new curriculum, actually, it's based on these words. So we have our learning outcomes, for example, even degree learning outcomes often have words around, these sort of transferable skills, employability skills, critical thinking, decision making, and ethical reasoning. And we have set up sort of debates and discussions in classrooms, and often these are assessed. Sometimes they're formatively assessed. But yes, we are teaching our students a wide range of skills through our teaching practices, and also encourage our students to appreciate the importance of diversity in professional settings, respect, and being accommodative to people of diverse backgrounds, whether that's abilities or color or religion or race or gender, whatever it is. Now to the case study. This is where I will just give you one thing that I started in Sussex in 2019. I called it project-based learning, where we give our students a question, an actual problem-based, real question, disease question, and put them in groups, and again, diverse groups, and they work on it to come up with a solution or presentation. So PBL is a student-centered, inquiry-based instructional approach, which you know already, and where learning is achieved through engaging with an extended inquiry. So it's where students are also bringing their own understanding and experience and knowledge. And so, and the construction of this knowledge actually occurs through social interaction and integration with prior knowledge. So this is something I think is quite valuable for our students when they can contribute in their learning. So it's something we've published already a couple of years ago. We looked at disease condition, and the students, they worked through it. They were free to choose and resource format. So we would give them the power to decide how they want to be assessed as a group, not individually, unless they have special needs, reasonable adjustments, that's different. So, but that was there. So the students get to choose how they want to be assessed, for instance. And we started off assessing it formatively, and then kind of moved on to a sort of slowly into a summative setting. And we give feedback in the sandwich method. And we looked at how many, did a survey, and I wanted to see what students' experience were in this. So 66% of the students agreed that the PBL tasks enabled them to build core identity, and about 74% of the students explicitly indicated that their participation was helpful in facilitating the integration of knowledge from previous modules and experiences. So obviously I don't have much time, but I wanted to just give you a quick overview of what we did, and that's the paper we published. Now, why do you think it's a decolonized almost a way of teaching? We'll just quickly go through some of the points here. So knowledge integration and consolidation, something that if you look at the traditional teaching lectures, let's say, there's a hierarchy. You have the lecturer at the top, students at the bottom, and it's didactic, so you just teach and students absorb the information and go away. Whereas here, we want to see that diverse, sort of creative, imaginative practices that our students have. And so they're bringing information from their personal experience. They're studying in this one module, but they're actually integrating information or bringing information from other modules. And also the fact that they're able to choose the way they want to be assessed. I know it's a bit challenging because you have to look at different assessment criteria, but I can come back to that later. And they're also working as a group over some number of times. And again, it's collective knowledge construction. They're learning key transferable skills as well, and they're dealing with future real world problems. And we are kind of breaking that traditional STEM formats where we look at MCQs, lab reports, and essays. In this case, students are presenting the information through a PowerPoint poster from very early on as a group. I know this is a practice that is used elsewhere as well, but here I think what's interesting is we are looking at their creativity. We're not giving them a set guideline. This is how you have to make a poster, or this is how you have to make a presentation. We really want them to work on it and see how they get on. And obviously the hierarchy and cultural sensitive feedback. I'm just not showing the whole why, but where they it's a very non-judgmental place where students, we give feedback to show them what they've done really well and what they could improve, which again, I guess common practice nowadays. So what we did now, I think we talked about it, so I'm not going to go through it. We actually brought in these tropical diseases, so perspectives of the global south, and we teach them, or we want them to go away and do research on history and sort of ethics, clinical trials, participants, demography, and really talk about it in those seminars, in those group learning. And from this year, when we've done it, it was actually quite interesting. Students had interesting views. So they did some students chose Ebola virus, which is specific to the endemic that's specific to African region, and it's not very common in the West. And they said that they learned about this sort of foreign diseases through collaboration. They gained insights into different regional contexts, but also understanding of bigger picture from people, different regions that are affected differently, and has enhanced their deep appreciation and quality for the quality of life disparities worldwide. Another student said that this approach allowed for a rich exchange of perspectives and experiences of the global impacts. The disease and everyone's own backgrounds and ethnicity help generate information, brainstorm ideas because of the race balance that we have in the group. We try to do that as much as possible, obviously, not always possible. So why the context is that the teaching approach, so that the pedagogy relevance to this practice, where we sort of put them in a group and they work together to create something at the end, is for them to, for this particular one, is because our assessment modes or the questions we create are actually problem-based questions in our exams. So students get to write case studies in the classroom, and it kind of helps them see how we construct that information, but they also create questions. So they construct the case study and they deconstruct it to write questions, and that helps them sort of see how we create questions. And so they have it 3 times per term in that module, so they get sort of used to what an exam question should look like. And they work with students, other students, and it encourages social interactions, and it connects theory to assessments and group learning, and also enhance the understanding of the material's relevance. And these case studies are, they're relevant to their assessment. So that's the pedagogy relevance. So we talked about the inclusive learning practices, and this is the pedagogy relevance, and also some of the decolonial practices as well.
Sorry, Zahid. So just going to ask you to wrap up. We're just running over time a bit. If you could thank you.
Okay. So what are you doing? Some of the reasons are here: critical thinking, decision making. I've talked about it already. What's next? We are looking into global classroom concept, which is something that we'll be doing with India next year. We have a number of staff training in place. So this is to make sure that everybody is on board. Teaching awareness is very, very important for us. So key areas, I'm just going to leave this with you, that we could do, and what have we achieved. So I'm just going to leave this slide on here, and I will be happy to take any questions. I think there are some questions in the chat.
Thank you, Zahid. Excellent talk, and sorry for cutting you short. And there is lots of questions in the chat, and I'm going to hand over to Question Master Extraordinaire Dave to lead us through them.
All right. So there's 4 main ones in the chat, but lots of commentary there to go through. But we'll start off with Alessandra's question, which was, I really enjoyed this talk. You mentioned at the beginning the reluctance to use the term decolonization, but this is now resolved. I was wondering if you could give more information about the process, about how this happened.
Right. So how it has happened. Okay. So so this is a student sort of co-created project. And first of all, we started off with a big school meeting where we had our students presenting these data and talking about the importance of decolonization. So rather than coming from a staff member, it was coming from our students. And then we also, we mentioned these words in different platforms. So the EDI committee meetings, in board of study meetings, we talked about it. In a conference that we organized a few years ago on the Race Equity Action Plan, we talked about it there. So I think we kind of phased in almost, the inclusive curricula, decolonized curricula, sort of joined them up, but slowly we talked about it. And there's also things around staff training. We embedded cultural competence, staff training, anti-racism, LGBTQ plus, and disability awareness. I think we kind of used that decolonization word, the term, and explained it in different ways in different platforms. And then now it's an acceptable term, actually. And I have to be honest, most of our faculty members have actually looked into it, and they have really put a lot of effort into sort of changing some of the contents that they used to teach in the past. And so now when I look at any module page, I can see that there are elements of that. So yeah, it's just keep talking about it in different platforms.
Excellent. Thank you. The question from Neil Pickles, which was, are professional accreditation bodies prompting discussion and awareness? Is it on their radar? And this prompted a lot of background chat in the commentary as well. So what are your thoughts on professional bodies getting involved in this?
You mean professional bodies, sort of the accreditation?
Yeah, so like the RSB, IBMS, RSC.
Yeah. So IBMS, so we are writing a paper right now actually on this. For biomedical science, IBMS, they don't mention decolonization per se, but they do have a section on inclusive practices. There's a bit of tiny paragraph that says, you should utilize sort of, I think it's inclusive practices and ethical issues. So I think by decolonizing the curriculum, what we are doing, we are adding extra bit to it rather than taking away what needs to be taught. We are giving a different context and different sort of perspective, as well as what is what already exists. So I don't think that this will be a problem. So far, we have chemistry degree, RSC accredited. We have, I believe, another degree that's RSB accredited. We didn't really have any issues with it. So yeah, it was done in a way that wouldn't sort of conflict with what they're asking us to do. We are still doing business as usual as per the...
Yeah, so you've been able to integrate it all into your programs. Yeah, excellent, brilliant. I'll combine Ian and Nigel's question into one. This was about getting your colleagues on board with the process. So Ian asked, how do you go about getting your colleagues to adopt the process? And Nigel was asking a similar question about getting people to start encouraging to adopt these practices. So in your expertise, in your experience, how have you gone about doing that?
So I'll give some strategies. So because we knew there was going to be some pushback from staff, we created some sort of aims and goals for the REAP. So that's the Race Equity Action Plan, and also the curriculum reformation, the new curriculum we have. And some of the goals said we want an inclusive curricula that will cover this, and the Race Equity Action Plan was in the center of it all. And we put key people in place. For example, Deputy Head of School for Research was in charge for the research side of it. So when you put important people in place and giving them a responsibility of within that area, they will follow up. Because in the EDI meeting, we will ask them, so can you give us an update on this? And so it wasn't easy, but we got it in the end. We made sure, for example, I'll give you an example. Nowadays, every PC advertised that goes out, it says we encourage candidates from such and such background to apply for this role. And we talk about our Race Equity Action Plan often. And so we have a very inclusive culture of research and whatnot. These weren't there before. So we kind of worked with HR as well. We worked with HR and changed our appraisal. We put a point in there. Did you do these trainings? So we made sure that, we talked about it in every single platform possible. That's to do with the school. And it worked. And now business school and media arts and humanities school, they have also adopted our Race Equity Action Plan, and they're doing the same thing, and they can see it's working. We've got some feedback from them recently. So I think make a lot of noise throughout, but put important people in charge of, whether they agree or not, it doesn't matter. They are responsible people. They'll make it happen.
Connie had a question.
So I'm a teaching associate and PhD researcher. So I'm quite junior and still learning a lot. But I'm interested in how you can make sure you can fairly assess the problem-based learning tasks if you give students so much choice to choose not just their mode of presentation, but their topics as well. How do you sort of design a marking criteria to make sure it can fairly cover everyone's different takes on that?
I'm glad you asked me that question. I think I was asked this one at least 4 times in the last 2 years in different places. So for the formative one, when we trialed it the first time, we give students a choice, like how do you want to present your information? And we'll ask them to tell us from their group. So they would say, okay, this group, they want to present it as a poster. The next group, they want to do a presentation. Actually, you had one that did a video, and it was awesome. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. The creativity we saw it's incredible. Now, when we provide our students with that information, we actually give them learning outcomes and what are the things we're assessing, and we give them the sort of the key themes, the key areas within the assessment criteria. One is creativity. Second one is scientific rigor of scientific information. And what was the other one? Structure and all the others. A few other bits. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. So we don't, and because it's formative, we don't really. It's not that difficult for us. As in, it's not in the framework. It has to be in a certain way for each and every one of them. We give them formative feedback, formative sort of sandwich feedback, and tell them, okay, you've done this presentation, great. Maybe put less words in on this slide, and put some images here and there. and the scientific content is the key thing. So it was marked by two people, myself and somebody else. And then he put these comments together and he sent it to them. So it's done formatively. Now let's come to summative bit. The summative one that we are starting this year is it's a lab work. So they'll be doing histology, and they're given 4 patients' cases. Each case, so one student, so the 4 in a group, one student does one case. But they have to do a group presentation. So they have to decide how they want to present it. They have 2 options. We've given them 2 options in this case, either a poster or a PowerPoint presentation. And there's a third option that's for students with reasonable adjustment. And if they cannot do group presentation, they can do it on their own, as Alex mentioned, but also digital poster. So they don't have to be in person when they're doing it. They could do it online. So we have these options. So in this case, the mark criteria is quite straightforward because we have existing mark criteria, assessment criteria for poster and PowerPoint. So I think the idea here is to, bring in those critical thinking, teamwork skills, decision making, and obviously presentations. But obviously we are judging, we are assessing their scientific output as well. So that's how we're doing it. We have formative assessment, which is slightly different to summative assessment.
That's brilliant. Thank you.